Hall. Last week, Sony comes out and says so is Nintendo the last healthy video game company? And I know that's a weird question to ask, and typically it's not a question that I would even ask because it sort of makes me feel like I'm leaning in one direction, which I don't. I love all platforms. I always have. I'm certainly not a fan of one over the other. But in light of everything that's been going on in the video game industry, I feel like it's a question that needs to be asked. So let's talk about it because I feel like there are some interesting answers to this question. If you're unfamiliar with what's going on recently, we have hardware prices going through the roof. When Nintendo announced the Nintendo Switch 2, they announced it at $450, $500 if you get the bundle with Mario Kart. And people lost their minds, or at least a small segment of the internet lost their minds, which when a small segment of the internet loses its mind, it makes it feels like a lot of people are losing their minds. And it was like, that's outrageous. $500 for a new Switch is crazy. And now let's look at things. The PlayStation has raised its price to damn near $1,000. Xbox raised the price to just about $1,000. The Steam machine just launched at like $1,100. The Steam Deck is now close to $1,000. Nintendo raised their price of the Switch by $50. So now it's technically $500 instead of $450. $500 don't seem so bad anymore, right? Sony comes along last week and they say, we are ending production on physical discs in 2028. No more physical media for the PlayStation. I've already covered that. We won't go over it again. Not Nintendo. Microsoft comes out yesterday and releases this huge statement, basically saying Game Pass has failed the company. The reason Microsoft or the Xbox brand is doing so bad,
can you hear me now?
Is because of Game Pass. This is something that developers have been saying for a very long time. But let's really break this
All right,
down.
it's working.
Both Sony and Microsoft over the last umpteen years have been collecting high-profile development studios, especially on the Microsoft side. This is no secret. Microsoft bought some of the biggest, if not the biggest, development studios in video games, period. They bought Blizzard. They bought Activision. They bought Bethesda and id. It's crazy the amount of studios that Microsoft was buying. And it was like, wow, what are they going to do with all these? They're going to make them all exclusives, but that amount of studios Microsoft was buying. And it was not what Microsoft did. Microsoft then comes along and starts spreading their games across multiple platforms, which I personally thought was a good idea. Sony is guilty of just about the same thing. Sony internally doesn't produce that many games. Now they buy studios and rename those development studios under a Sony banner, but you got to remember stuff like Naughty Dog, Insomniac, they're bigger studios. Those were not Sony-owned studios. Sony purchased those studios. Now let's take a look at Nintendo. When's the last time Nintendo acquired a studio? I mean, I think this year they acquired Namco Bandai, right? Because of the partnerships with stuff like Hyrule Warriors, and I think even then they bought like an 80% stake in the company. That's the first time that I can think of Nintendo buying a studio. The other thing that these other platform holders, speaking of Sony and Microsoft, have been doing is buying studios, rushing games out, the games failing or not performing to their standards, and then closing the studio down, or in some cases, completely canceling the games. When's the last time that Nintendo closed a studio? I can't think of any time that Nintendo has acquired a studio, let them make a game or two, and then turned around and closed it. What was the name of that studio? Actually, before I speak out of term, Alpha Dream. Okay, in 2019,
Hello, I
Alpha
see you
Dream was
there.
closed, but
I'm
Alpha
gonna
Dream
call
went
you
bankrupt.
Lucy because I can't
Nintendo didn't
say it
necessarily
fully,
close Alpha
your
Dream,
full
but
name.
that's one. The amount of
But
games that have
how
been
are you?
canceled, or
And that guy
studios that
is
have
not
just
me, it's
been
from
either
YouTube.
released or completely shut down by both Sony and Microsoft, is pretty crazy. And it all points back to one thing, the one thing that keeps ringing out to me, and that is the fact that Nintendo is a video game company. Nintendo makes games. All of Nintendo's first party stuff is made by Nintendo. They're not necessarily, with some exceptions, like, you got your Metroids and stuff that they do bring in, or your Pokemon, your Pokopia, however you pronounce it. But for the most part, when you have a big game on a Nintendo platform, like a Zelda, um, with some exceptions, Mario, Donkey Kong, all of those games, Mario Karts, those are all in-house Nintendo games. That's because Nintendo is a video game company. Microsoft is not. Xbox is, but Microsoft is not. Microsoft didn't start as a video game company, and Sony didn't start as a video game company. Microsoft makes operating systems for PCs and like a million other pieces of software, and I mean, they've tried to get in the hardware business other times. Who remembers the Zune? And then Sony is, again, both companies making great products in the past. I love the Sony stuff. I love PlayStation. PlayStation 2 is one of the best consoles ever made. The Xbox 360, one of the greatest consoles ever made. But let's be real here. Neither of these companies are video game companies. They are companies who got into video games. Now, some can argue that Nintendo is a company that got into video games. But Nintendo helped create video games. You have to remember that. Now, whether you want to go back and really nitpick the fine details of, something like an Odyssey or Atari, but Nintendo saved video games back in the 80s, the early 80s, because Atari was completely sinking the video game industry. The infamous E.T. thing. Could we be seeing a repeat of what happened in the 80s happening now? Because from an outsider's perspective, from somebody who doesn't play Nintendo devices, which I know a lot of people don't, a lot of people look at it still as like a kid's console or whatever, and they only play on, or either PC or Xbox or PlayStation. It looks like the video game industry is on fire. Unless you're a fan of Nintendo, then everything looks sort of fine from our perspective. And I say our because I'm speaking of the royal we, all of us that like Nintendo stuff, because I do love my Switch. I personally think that the Switch 2 is the greatest video game console ever made. I know there's a lot of people that would disagree, but because this is also a Nintendo Switch 1 by extension, I think it's going to go down as one of the greatest consoles. Let's also take a look at what Nintendo is doing with their first party releases. Almost all first party releases for the Switch 2 are 100% physical. Okay? Like everything that is coming out, all the Zelda games, Donkey Kong, Mario Kart, everything is, in, again, you say what you want about something like a Pokopia, is that how you say it? Pokopia. I believe that may have been a key card. but again, not necessarily a first-party Nintendo game. Nintendo is still putting all their games out physical. Even some of the games that aren't coming physical to other consoles, like Cyberpunk, completely physical. Nintendo is also one of the only companies who is notating, making third-party developers notate on the box when it's not physical. I would show you a Nintendo Switch 2 version because it's even bigger down here at the bottom on the Switch 2 cases. It's almost downright ugly, the warning that they put on the front of these games. I don't have any Switch 2 key card games because I don't really find a reason to have them. But it's very apparent when you're going to get a game for your Nintendo console that doesn't have the full game on it. And for a PlayStation or an Xbox game, it's not apparent. Sometimes the full game's on there, but you still need the internet. In which case, you got to go to the back of the box. You got to read the back of the box. You got to go, is internet required to play this game? And in some cases, it's very difficult to find. On a Nintendo game, they make their third-party developers really put like a big banner across the bottom. They're still supporting physical in a way that no one else is. And if you want my honest opinion, I think it has a lot to do with the fact that they're releasing game cards and they're not doing disc anymore. Game cards are easier to produce. Game cards are expandable over the years. I mean, at some point, they could produce a game card that's a terabyte big if they wanted to. There's no disc out there, Blu-ray disc, that holds a terabyte. Again, I made a video about that. I think it's a very interesting question when you really look at it. Is Nintendo the last healthy video game company? Because Xbox said themselves yesterday, they're not healthy. They dumped 4 studios. Thank God they didn't close the studios, but they dumped 4 studios and they're laying off like 5,000 people, which is crazy. Lots of talent leaving the Xbox pool. They bought all these people. They bring all this talent in and they're like, look at all the talent we have. Look at all of these development studios that are going to make these great games. And then they turn around and fire them, which is crazy. And I got to be honest with you, Sony's not looking any better right now. They released that statement last week, and then they haven't posted well, actually today I think they had their first post since they released that information about discs being discontinued. Sony seems to be in just as uncomfortable of a place. And maybe they course correct with this next set of hardware. Maybe prices of hardware start to come back down, and memory starts to come back down, and things sort of level out. I think that's inevitable. That's what's going to happen. You guys remember the crypto boom when video cards were just like outrageously priced? I mean, they're still outrageously priced, but they were way more outrageously priced back, 5 years ago, or however long ago that was. I just think it's very interesting when you look at this. If you want to be a collector, if you want to support physical media, if the thing you care about is tangibly owning your game and you want to be able to play it forever, really the only option that I see is get yourself a Nintendo Switch 2 or a Nintendo Switch 1, because all of these games that I'm holding here, these are just a couple that I grabbed off the shelf. I have 300 other games on the shelf that are all physical. Everything from Assassin's Creed to Grand Theft Auto, to third-party games, first-party games. Witcher 3 is completely physical on here. This is sort of the only place that you can do that. Support this if that's what you want. Or, if you're not a Nintendo person, support companies like Limited Run Games, I Am 8-Bit, Super Rare, Mod Retro. You have to, for lack of a better term, you have to vote with your wallet. buy the stuff that you want to support. And I'm not saying that there's a problem with there being a space for digital games. There certainly isn't. I think we live in a time right now where we have more options than we've ever had before, and that's very cool. I like that. But I certainly don't want an all digital future. And for that reason, I'm going to continue. I'm going to go out. I went out and bought Star Fox on Game Cart because Star Fox is installed on the Game Cart. In like 20 years, if I want to go back and play this version of Cyberpunk or Mario Galaxy 1 and 2 or Star Fox, the new Star Fox, I could play it without having to hit an internet check, without having to re-download anything, nothing. I could just play it. I could go to a Best Buy, I could buy a copy of Cyberpunk, and then in the parking lot, get in my car, pull out my Switch 2, and start playing without needing to hit an internet checkpoint or download anything. And sure, there's patches and stuff that you can download, but those are optional. And that's why I truly think that Nintendo right now is the last healthy video game company. And that is because Nintendo is a video game company. And these other companies aren't necessarily, they have branches, but they're not video game companies. Or at least not in the sense that Nintendo is, or in the sense that Sega was, or Atari was. I think we need more of that. That's my opinion. What do you think? Hit the comments and let me know. Maybe you're not a Nintendo fan and maybe you're going to be like, you're fanboying over Nintendo, and that's fine, I understand, but I make good points and you really can't argue that. Hit the comments and let me know. When's the last time Nintendo acquired a bunch of studios and then turned around and shit-canned them? When's the last time Nintendo said they were going to stop producing physical media? I know Nintendo introduced key cards, but first-party games are still not on a key card. First-party games are still installed on the cart. There really is no denying it. Just a thought. And for that, I have to say, enjoy the journey, because that's what life's all about. Could Nintendo